when I was in high school, I got in a fair amount of hot water trouble for doing an alternative newspaper. And it was at that point I knew that this is something that I wanted to do because it was always sort of at the edge of creative work and also like provocative work, like putting out work that either people really love or really hate, but if it's in the middle, people sort of feel indifferent. So I think
Hmm.
from the beginning of time, I was really destined to do this kind of work for a living. And I've always been interested in I think from a young age, just like making things and building things. I'm sure you get that a lot on on the podcast. People said, "Oh, I want to be an architect when I grow up." But like I remember making like replicas of like baseball stadiums, when I was a kid out of paper or things like that. So in some ways, I've manifested some of those architectural and design visions through my work, and I continue to do so.
Fascinating. I do want to pick up on a quick question, though. What would be considered an alternative or provocative newspaper?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think I've been out of high school for quite a long time, so I think the whatever they call it, the limits for getting in trouble are probably past. But I had a couple really good friends in high school who started this alternate. I guess it was a zine, before zines were zines,
Mm.
and it was called the Grateful Dreads, and they were this was like a Jesuit high school, like college preparatory school in Seattle. Pretty, like round hole, round peg type thing. We actually tried to go through like proper channels to create something, and we were sort of ignored, so we did it anyway. And it definitely poked fun at the edges of some of the people and some of the practices of the school, which they didn't take too kindly to. Actually got to like the point where we had to like bring a parent in because we got some lines were crossed. But I think ultimately what happened was we prevailed because we had asked for permission from the school that the to be given like a counselor or an advisor for the project, and they denied it. So because we had documented that, we ended up actually getting taken out to lunch every year for or every month for senior year as a way to help them figure out how to actually start like a proper um, journal for publication. So it was kind of at that moment that I knew I wanted to do something in storytelling or design. And they were more the writers, but I actually knew how to. I mean, this was back in the day, so this was like late, after the Mac came out, but like early desktop publishing. So I
Wow.
knew how to kind of put stuff together. So I was called the other half, and they were the writers. And so I wasn't really writing it, but because I was associated with this sort of gang of pirates, I got thrown into I got to walk the plank with them a little bit. So I knew like that felt really good. And I think that sort of sets the tone for the rest of this podcast because I think everything sort of big and worthy that I've done both professionally and then I guess as we talk about the architecture and the projects is over time incrementally feeling better and better with bigger risks, better risk taking,
Mm.
and then also learning to become a good client.
Mm.
And
Mm.
like having clients and seeing all the behaviors of clients that I've worked with, and then learning to be a good client, like giving direction on projects that I'm leading, but also knowing, commissioning artists, filmmakers, illustrators, photographers, kind of knowing that balance of how many of the ingredients you need to give them versus how much freedom, I guess, and rope you give them to like actually do the work and not over direct. So I think I started learning that pretty probably younger than I should have. But I've had a lot of projects through my life that as you get older and move up the ladder creatively, like professionally, sometimes, as you guys know, you get away from the thing that got you psyched about getting into it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a reminder of that in my studio. Um, about making sure I'm always doing something where I'm really like still making and touching the work.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think that's first of all, it's a great story, and does give some background to you because you come from a creative background, you've had a very successful career, and I like the point of you've had many clients in the past, and that definitely informed how you would behave as a client. Mm-hmm. So, take us to the story. So, what year is it when you guys decide, you and your family decide to purchase a different piece of land, a new piece of land, and move? Like, take us through that thought process.
We lived in Seattle, my wife and I, and then we moved to New York. So we lived in New York for a little bit, and then we moved back to Seattle, to start having a family. And we lived in a bunch of different areas of Seattle. And a friend of mine lived sort of east of Seattle, and you had to, cross the bridge, which was like a big deal. I actually grew up on that side, and then we moved to Seattle in like middle school. And I remember it was a big deal to go to Seattle. Like there was a toll bridge, like it was an effort. And so when we were in Seattle, and then I went to go visit this friend. He lived in a town called Issaquah, which seemed really far away, but in hindsight, not so much now. And I remember joking to my wife, like, do we need like our passports to go there? Like, do we need? And we actually ended up buying a house in Snoqualmie, which is where Snoqualmie Falls is, which is kind of where Twin Peaks, North Bend,
okay,
Snoqualmie, where all that was filmed. So we bought a house there. The house was built for us. It was in like a development. It was very like it was very like Pleasantville,
okay, yeah,
situation. Like
great reference.
On the corner, like nylon white picket fence. Honestly, like a great place to start raising kids because you basically have built-in neighbors and people watching out, right? If your kid runs across the street, so on and so forth. And honestly, at that point, like I thought, okay, this is it. Like this is where we're going to be. This is like the American dream.
Yeah.
And so the house. I think probably that project, like building that house, was a little bit of it gave me like a wrong impression maybe of what it's actually like because it went up in like 4 to 6 months.
Shit.
And you pick out a couple things, but you don't, you're not like interacting with the guys on the site. There's no architect. It's pretty much like 90% of the way there. Pick out the plan. So we actually had our second kid, like literally, like I think 2 days after we moved in. So this is like 2002.
Okay.
So we lived there for a while, and then when we were planning on having our third kid, we were like, okay, maybe we need a bigger house. Like that's probably the common conversation. But when we had our house built, part of the reason why we moved to that specific area is where they're building a new elementary school. So our kids were the first kids to go to that school. But at the time when we were having our third kid, the sort of development had expanded quite a bit, right? And there were a lot more families, a lot more houses, and the boundaries were sort of shifting. So if we wanted to buy a new construction house in that same neighborhood, there was a chance our kids were not going to be able to go to that school anymore. So it's always interesting how these stories start because, right, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we're having another kid, we need a modern house.
What? That wasn't the reason.
But at the same time, on like this parallel path, I had worked as an art director at Seattle Magazine, and I was going to visit all these houses. I was in houses designed by architects in Seattle. At the time, like the Olson Kundigs of the world, George Suyama, Miller Hole. I didn't really know the name so much, but I was in these houses, like we were doing shoots, so I was getting a taste of this. And then I I had left that job and I had gone to be a design director for Lexus, the car company. And so now I was traveling around the world, and we were shooting cars and film spots and stuff around the world. And we did the story in China, and it was a series of architects who created this hotel near the Great Wall. And I remember getting the film back and seeing this image from this photographer, Chad Holder, where I was getting ready to like design the story, and it was like this cast in place concrete wall with this like wood planking and this single tree. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I mean, I had seen a little bit of this in Seattle, but I hadn't really seen it. It's like one of those things where you look at it and it's like seeing like, it just blew my mind. Like, I was like, what is this? What is this design? Like, this is insane. Like, this is not happening on my street. It's like, beige, 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 white, red, beige, beige, and it was like hardy plank, and it was, everything looked the same, which was kind of funny because, for me, who was doing work that was not like that in my professional life, to like be living in a place that was very,
vanilla,
aggregated,
yeah.
you know. So my wife and I started talking. We're like, well, if we looked at a lot of houses. I mean, we looked at a lot of houses. They were just getting big. This was like, so now we're in like 2005, 2006. It's like everything was just getting bigger. I mean, there were like 4 or 5 story houses, like
Wow.
insane. And so we're like, well, if we have to move, if we have to uproot and move the kids out, like maybe we should move. Like maybe we should do the big move. And so we started looking around. We actually had made an offer on a house in a different town that was further along. We pulled out of that. A friend of mine came to visit one time. He's like, "Don't do that." That's like, I mean, I worked with him, so he knew me. I mean, I like the Steve Jobs phrase, like, "Why join the Navy when you can be a pirate?" And like, he kind of reminded me of that a little bit. And he's like, "No, you don't want to live here. This is like another version of where you live now. This is a town." So we started looking for land, and we, at this time, like, I'm probably looking at Dwell. I'm probably looking at Architecture Digest a little bit. I'm most of my architecture references were more from like doing shoots and going to spaces. I grew up I never lived in a house like this. So I grew up like in traditional houses. And lots of different rooms, right? Like living room, separate kitchen, basement, blah, blah, blah. So I started like piecing, we were talking about this. We're like, what if we find land? Like, what if we buy land and we build a house? Like, oh, that sounds cheaper. No. And we looked at everything. Like at the time, Dwell had like a prefab option.
Yeah.
I don't remember who it was with, but I remember we looked at it. One day, so at this time, I think I was, by this time I had left Lexus, and I was the creative director at Brooks, the running shoe company. And I remember I was in my office there, and I got a call from my wife, and she's like, "Hey, I think I found something." So this is like June 2006, maybe. Like, I think I found something that's interesting. It's in this town called Carnation. So Snoqualmie and Carnation are probably like 20 minutes from each other.
Okay.
So no, but Snoqualmie is much bigger. Carnation's only a few thousand people. And, Carnation was sort of like, as a kid, like a town you would go to like a horse show or you drive through it, but it wasn't really a town we would go and stop and hang out.
Right.
It was not on the radar. And it's named after the Carnation Dairy brand.
Oh.
Like that's where the research farm. So it's literally it is a city. It's not a town, I guess, but it's literally a city named after a brand. Like how perfect, right? So the stars were aligning, and so I remember it was like it was pretty nice out. So we went with our kids, and we reached out to the land. There's a land agent, which I didn't even really. I was like, oh, there's land agents. Like they just deal with land. And so we made some calls, and we met this guy at the land at the entrance. There was like a farm gate, and it was very overgrown. It was like second growth Weyerhaeuser, which is the tree company here. They had sold off all these parcels, and all the parcels were 20 acres. I mean, we had looked at a. I'm kind of skipping a few things. Like we had looked at a lot of land that was kind of pretty crappy, and this one was not fantastic. I mean, but it was big, and so we're thinking, okay, there's ways that it's like 21 and a half acres, so it's like, oh my
Wow.
God, we had no idea. Like we had no idea about the biggest thing that I was reading was okay, make sure there's power at the street, right?
Yeah, yeah.
To me, that was like the worst. That was like the least of our worries with this site. I'd soon find out like that bringing power out to the street was like, I mean, it's expensive, but that's like peanuts, right? So we looked at it. It was like this, it was like this rare, beautiful um, late spring day in Washington, and there was about a 500 600 foot pathway to kind of where you would build a house, or the area where you build a house, and it was an existing logging road from Weyerhaeuser, and the trees were all overgrown, and the owners were, the owners had actually, they bought the property, they had a kind of a schematic, and they were going to build a house here. It was huge. I mean, it was like I think it had an elevator.
Wow.
It was, and it was like cutting right. It was not even using the existing road. It was cutting through the forest and then
Mm.
making kind of a turnaround. And it was like sort of this like McMansion. I
Yeah.
think they were an older couple. We never actually met them, but through our agent, we had communication. But so we went out there, and we were like, we kind of like that was we had looked at we probably looked at like 20 or 30 lots, and
Wow.
we were like, man, this is interesting. There wasn't, you kind of had to like wrench your neck to find if there was a view. Like
Mm.
it was pretty overgrown. But there was something about it for me, like, okay, it was in the community, like the valley between like Snoqualmie and Carnation. There's this other town called Fall City. So it's like within, it's not like completely foreign.
Right.
And it was small, and we're up about 450 feet. So we're kind of up above the valley, which is huge here because it floods.
Mm.
So you don't want to be building in the valley. You want to be sort of above there. So we talked to the agent. I think the land was like, it was like right around 300, and I think it was like 350, maybe 330 to 350. We're like, oh man, that's like, we paid $320,000 for the house we were living in the development. Right. And so we went from,
Which was not 21 acres large.
no. And like when we lived in Seattle, we had a townhouse, and that was like 2000. So that was like $210,000 for like a townhouse in Seattle. That
Yeah.
townhouse now is like 1.4 million.
Yeah.
It's right next to the freeway. So now
Hmm.
we're going from like 210 to like 330, 350 for the house. And now we're going to, or 20 for the house. Now 350 for just land. Like there's nothing there. Um, from 2000 like two, which is when we bought our house in Snoqualmie, to when we moved, like 2002 to 2000, right before like the real estate Titanic sunk in 2000, late 2007, 2008.
Mm.
The house was a good investment that we lived in. Like it went up pretty considerable. Like And so we were like, can we do this? So we looked into it, and the other thing we didn't realize is like land takes a long time. You don't just like, it's not like you find it and then there's a lot more to it. So
You mean in
suddenly,
terms of construction?
in terms of like feasibility and like buying
Mm.
the land, so what I didn't know is, I was like suddenly I was like driving down to the to learn all about like what were the like feasibility issues,
Hmm.
So we got like the report, but it's land, there's not much there. So I needed to learn about like the setbacks. I needed to learn about, there was a homeowners association
Mm.
where we bought the land, but it's just for the road maintenance. There's no architectural review,
Oh,
which is
nice.
another consideration. I think the only thing was you had to put the house, you had to like be like 200 to 300 feet from the road of where you built. Like they didn't want people. It wasn't like where we lived, where all the houses were 5 feet from the
Yeah. Right.
road.
Right.
And so, we're like, okay, it's 21 acres. There was forest practices uh, on the site. So basically 16 and a half acres were in forest management, which meant you could not develop in that area. Or if
Hmm.
you pulled it out of that, you'd have to pay back taxes
Mm.
for all the years. And we didn't, that was actually really interesting because we weren't planning on using the whole 21 acres,
Sure.
but we took over when we bought the land. We took over the forest management plan, and my wife and I ended up going to like a Washington State University Extension forest management courses to learn about the land. And because part of it, when you buy it, you have to update the forest plan and you have to manage the site to the forest plan.
Wow.
So it's kind of like, you think you're going into this thing just like buying land and building a house. And it's sort of like getting an education in a lot of things that you never really planned for, but you pay for. So I learned that we had there was a steep slope because we have about of our property, like 6 or 7 acres are on top, and then it slopes down, and then it keeps going. So once we figured out all these things, we talked to the agent. We kind of figured out like, can we build here? That's the biggest thing. Check
Sure.
the title, do all the stuff. So we do that. We ended up. I think we had to put like $50,000 down,
Hmm.
and that was like, oh man. And so like there was, and we're thinking, oh gosh, we probably can afford to live in our house, pay our mortgage, have all of our other household expenses, and cover the new mortgage on the land for like a year, and then we got to be like moved into the new house. Well,
Wow.
yeah, that was happening. And so we bought the land. I think it closed at the end of 2007.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Okay.
it took a while. It took a while. I mean, I think maybe some of my dates aren't completely accurate, but it was from the time we like made a commitment to buy the land and then go through all the feasibility. It was like a 3 to 4 months till the close.
Yeah.
So at about so we're going into like 2007, and now you're like a little frightened, right? Because you're like, oh, now we got to kind of move, no, like we gotta like start going on the project, but we didn't even know what it was.
So when you bought the land, you guys had not sold your current or previous
Oh,
house yet, right?
no, no.
Did you guys, before you bought the land or leading up to the purchase, were you speaking with architects and contractors? Because I mean, you knew obviously that if you bought the land, you'd have to hire somebody to at least build the thing for you.
Yeah, we hadn't spoken with anybody. We were still thinking, oh man, like prefab, that sounds interesting.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Or like maybe a house plan, or I mean, most of the houses that are up here are like for instance, like they shot a lottery commercial at a house up here. It's like probably 7 to 8 thousand square feet.
That's big house.
It's like there are some kind of like more, I would say like not Northwest modern, but there's like log houses. There's like, but there's also like, I saw this house the other day. I was driving and I saw a for sale sign, which doesn't happen a lot up here. And so I drove down the road and there's like this, like, I don't even know. It looks like it should be in Provence or something. I'm like, what?
Double
Like
take on
aliens
it.
like dropped it down in the middle of the night. Like there's like Portuguese tile and like
Oh,
I was like, this is amazing. Anyway, the probably actually the closest house we saw is our neighbor's house, which is still far away, and it's kind of it's kind of got like a northwest modern kind of vibe to it, but nothing like what we ended up doing. And so we kind of had to figure out. So what we did was we waited till the kids finished school, um, and then our so this is kind of funny. So the house we were living in, the same exact house but just flipped, is across the street, right?
Yep.
And so
Yep.
Kitty Carter. So someone was, and we knew the people. So someone wanted to. I think they put their house up for sale because they were moving to a bigger house in the neighborhood, like with a pool, and someone missed out on buying their house. So they just came over to our house and said, "Would you sell?" I
Yeah.
think I think that's how. And so we ended up selling our house. We moved into like a rental in the neighborhood so our kids could finish school. I think we were there like 6 months or
Wow.
something like that. But at one point, like there was like a week where we had the mortgage on the house, we had the mortgage on the land, we had rent. Like it was brutal.
That's an
wow.
expensive week.
Yeah. Well, in hindsight, um, sort of like the power at the street, that seemed like it was expensive, but it was, there were moments, right? And so
Hmm.
around that time, once we bought the land, like we were starting, my wife and I started to kind of keep separate um, notebooks of kind of what we liked. And, we had, like, she had really she liked very not traditional, like the house we lived in, but more sort of like, maybe like historical traditional, more with like patina and character, wraparound porch, so on. So, like,
Okay.
it was more, I guess maybe it's like more like, it's not Architecture Digest. It's probably more like Cottage Living or, House of
Gotcha.
Beautiful. But not, so we were coming at it, we were shooting in these houses that were super, super contemporary modern or like super modern from more of like a design aesthetic, maybe material wise. And she was like, oh, like this kind of country, like kind of a country living, kind of country home, because that was the place we were moving to
Yeah, makes sense in a way.
and so we looked at like there's a bookstore in Seattle. If you guys come to Seattle, you got to go to. It's called Peter Miller Books. It's sort of like William Stout in San Francisco.
Okay.
Oh,
It's like
okay.
it's nirvana for architecture, not just for the books, but you know, Peter is like amazing. Like he knows everybody. And I was like, I was going into his bookstore for design for brand like design books. Like when I
Hmm.
was like 12, like 13 years old downtown. And so so anyway, so we're like, I got for Christmas Home Kundig houses. I don't know if it came from I think it either came I think it came from his bookstore or Amazon. I don't know, but and it was we had I had collected a lot of books. We were clipping I mean there were still magazines then, so like we're clipping things out of magazines, we're making notes, we're chatting about it. Um and it wasn't until we got Tom's book, I think, that we both sort of like looked at it, and it sort of like it sort of scratched the itch for both of us in terms of we didn't really know. We had seen Olson Kundig buildings without knowing they're Olson Kundig, but um, seeing something that was new, that felt like it had been there a long time, and then it became clear to us, like visiting the site, because we had the site for quite a bit of time before we actually broke ground, that like this kind of cottage house in the deep forest with the wraparound porch, like we're not like in the South, like it's not really gonna, I don't think it was gonna fly. And so I think we both quickly got around to this idea. And so I had the book, and I remember that. So this is spring 2008 now.
Mm.
And I had an office in my house that was on the first floor. It was like this very weird, like geometric, like triangle, or I don't even know what shape it was, but like you'd walk in the front door and there was this big open, like not, it wasn't really a living room. It was just like this open room with vaulted ceiling. And then to the right was this like double doors to my office. So like the kids are in there when they're little, like playing, you can hear them, people come over, it's, I was like, man, I need a separate office like when we do this because it just wasn't great. But so I went in there one night after the kids went to bed and everything, and I went on their website. I went on Olson Kundig's website. I think at the time they were Olson Sundberg Kundig Allen. So I think we've seen them through like 3 or 4 name changes. That's how long this takes, right? And I remember going to the website, and I was looking at the book, and I think the projects that sort of got me in the book were the brain. The brain really informed the studio.
Mm.
There was something about Studio House, which I know you guys I think talked about with Tom on when he was on the podcast, but there was something about it, not necessarily like what we ended up with, but the sighting of it is interesting because it sort of sits at the edge between sort of like a forested and like a refuge and a prospect,
Mm.
which is very similar to our site. That's a much different scale of a house than what we have, but
Sure.
there was enough DNA in that book to like get me super psyched. And so I went onto the website, I went onto the contact form, and I wrote like basically like a letter. Like I just said, hey, we bought this site. Um, we're in the process of thinking about like who we like, and we don't even know if you'd work with us or we can afford you or whatever.
I
But
was going to ask, like, did you have some sense, because Olson Kundig's office, whatever their name was at that time, they're a very reputable, established, top tier
yeah.
office, like, absolutely. When you were submitting that form, were you thinking, were you a bit apprehensive, thinking, why would they even bother with this, scale of house or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably super naive because I mean, I had no clue what something like that would cost, honestly.
Hmm.
And, which is probably good. Um, I'm definitely, it's not stopped me before. I think,
Yeah.
when we bought our house that we lived in, there we were actually going to make an offer on a cheaper house, but my point was like, well, if we stretch a little bit more, like if things go well, like this will give us more of a runway for like the, forever house. And
Hmm.
so I had no, like, I didn't know I didn't know anything about like cost per square foot or anything. It was more about, to me, this is like the courting phase of the project where it's like, hey, I'm trying to find like someone who's consistently established, who has demonstrated like delivery of a project, right, at like a detail and craft level and an aesthetic that we think could work for the site that we had, and and maybe a little, and then maybe like the criteria, probably like more so for me than my wife is like, a kindred rebel spirit
Nice.
to go on this adventure together. So
That was part
definitely,
of the note that you wrote?
yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure, I don't know if they still have it, but I mean, in my mind, like I'm hoping that those sort of criteria is sort of how maybe they see themselves, or
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I knew like I wasn't right. I was writing through to the website, but it was really like the book, like
Mm.
I saw the book. These are the examples. This is the vibe I get. This is the kind of like I don't I don't necessarily think reading that book you would get a sense of you got a sense of Tom's work, but I don't know quite yet that you maybe got a sense of Tom,
Hmm.
you know. But I do think that quote at the beginning of the book, like only common things happen when common sense prevails. I mean, that kind of caught me because I think that spoke back to my, you know, high school time,
Hmm.
getting in trouble. Like I didn't get in trouble because I wanted to get in trouble. I got into trouble because I wanted to do something, you know, with friends,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
there were um, we weren't really troublemakers, you know, but I don't think Tom is a troublemaker, but I do think he does investigate the edges, you know, and he is very comfortable with the right kind of client collaborator to know the questions to ask. And so like literally click the button and then crickets. Like I mean, and, you know, I had no expectation. Like in my mind, I thought, oh, this is it, you know. And I don't even think like I told my wife. I think I went back to bed, and then like just time passed,
Right.
and then so like 3 months later, I'm at Brooks, and I get an email from the head of marketing at that time, you know, like acknowledging the note. And I'm like, whoa, okay, like there's someone at the other end, you know? And then it was right, yes, this was like it was right before I think Tom was going on like a trip to Africa with some other architects. And so I remember they emailed me back and they said, hey, you know, we'd like to do like Tom would like to do a quick call with you just to kind of like, you know, figure like just to like um, get a sense of what you're thinking. Is it a good vibe? You know, the first thing I'm thinking is, oh man, I bet that's expensive. But like, no, there was none, like there was none of that like discussion. Honestly, it was more just very relationship based. So I was in my office. I was so nervous. Like I think I like closed like the shade on my door and I had to like mentally prepare myself. And I think it was only going to be like 20 minutes, but I think we spoke for an hour. You know, I mean, as you know, he's very generous with his time. And I could tell in the call, like he said, like, hey, you know, let's have the call. I'm going on vacation. I'm going to be away for a while. And then, you know, we can kind of, if there's a there, we can kind of pick it up, you know, when I get back. So we had the conversation, and at this time, it's just kind of like there's no program, right? It's like we had 3 kids, so we're gonna need 4 bedrooms, you know, basically.
Mhm.
Um, our house was like 2,200 square feet that we were living in currently. You know, I knew I was gonna want an office. You know, it's kind of the perfect canvas for him.
Mm.
This project because it's a big site, but it's a you know, I think one of the things he's very aware about is that you know it doesn't need to be a gigantic house, and he's very quick to sort of edit or pare back maybe things that maybe you think that you need that you don't or that you really don't need. Like
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're a film director, you don't need a cinema room,
Right.
right? You know, or so we had the call. You know, obviously it went very well. And the next thing was to go meet in person. So I think that was like a few months later
Wow.
once he got back. So we we went we went to the office. I think I don't remember. I think I went to the office first and then I brought because I was still like I mean by that time obviously like I had told my wife like hey we're talking about Moon Day
Okay.
and she's probably like okay you know Lou he's you know I mean I've done some like crazy things like in my career you know I mean I like played hockey with Wayne Gretzky and you know I write letters to the editor of like Time magazine and I you know like I like to when I work, like I like to have direct contact with the end-to-end client. Like I like to be, for better or worse, like I work really well with that kind of mind, like entrepreneur,
Hmm.
maverick person, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't think that she was like really surprised, just probably like, this is interesting, you know, let's see where this goes. So um, actually, what happened was, I remember. So this is what I remember: is we didn't go to their office next. They came out to visit us. So we met them in town here. We met them at a Starbucks, and it was Tom and the project architect was Edward Lalonde, who's now an owner. So you know, I think this meeting was like 2008,
Wow.
and then I think Edward had just started just started at Olson Kundig, was there for a little while. So we met. They met our kid. I think our kids were with us, and then
Mhm.
we went to the site, and they also came to our house. And
Your
so
current house to see how you live.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was like, oh God. And, you know, you feel like I didn't get the sense from them, but I think you feel like you're being judged a little bit, no matter what architect, you know, because I'm sure you're in there and like, oh man, you know, like what, like, are they ready for this? Like you're going from like this thing, which is like kind of a commodity, right, to
Right.
like this other thing. And you know, they walked through it. They were looking at stuff, and it's interesting because we didn't go from like a 2,200 square foot house to like a 4,200 square foot house. We went from like a 2,300 square foot house to just under a 3,000 square foot
Oh,
house.
wow.
Hmm.
But I remember, you know, they sort of very quickly told us that like this is kind of a 2,300 square foot house that is just very um, maybe it's like mismanaged space, right? Because it's like all these different rooms, like
Hmm.
Yeah. It feels like an
probably
800 square foot house.
yeah, you can probably you know. So we had the meeting with them at the house. The meeting on the site was super interesting because we had we before I had done the reach out to Olson Kundig, like you know, I had worked with different architects through work.
Hmm.
I had looked up different architects before I even like sent the email to Olson Kundig because I was like, no way. You know, they were sort of on the moonshot,
Right.
you know.
Okay.
And so we had had a few others to the site, and it was interesting because um, you know, more it was more kind of like to just see what is it like to talk to an architect, like what you know, what is the process. It wasn't more like, oh, we're gonna have them out and we're gonna hire them on the spot and go. It was more like it was kind of temperature check, but it was like knowledge gaining. And some of them were people like I knew through people, so it wasn't like a big deal. But what we learned very quickly is like we had one come out and they kind of gave us a quick like rundown of the cost of they thought, well, what it would cost to build like a 3,000 square foot house on this site with all the, you know, with like pre-construction feasible, like, and we're like, oh crap, like that's a big number,
Yeah.
you know. And I think we started hearing that more and more, like
Yeah.
that number kept popping, that range, and so the
I'm
mindset
I'm wondering,
was
you don't have to say the specific number, but was it like multiple times more than what you were expecting?
uh, I mean, I think you know what surprised us more was the all the site stuff because we didn't really
Hmm.
take
Hmm.
into consideration like you're going to need to do a large drainage review,
Yeah.
you're going to need to drill a well, you're going to need to hire a geotech, you're going to need all this
Yeah.
stuff that you know we were thinking about maybe and by that time we were thinking about okay $300 times 3,000 square feet equals $900,000, you know what I mean,
Yep.
like
Yeah.
we weren't doing like the soft cost math
Hmm.
or any of that maybe. And so I think by the time that I said that with Olsen, I kind of had an idea maybe of the ballpark we were talking
Hmm.
about.
Yep.
And and the other thing is, folks, we looked at a few different things. We looked at design build, we looked at prefab, but what was interesting is when people would come up here to look at it before Olson Kundig is they would like step way back from the edge. You know, they were almost like 300 to 500 feet from like the steep slope. They were like kind of back in the woods, right? I mean, Tom references it as the ecotone, like the line that sort of where the forest ends, and you know, you could sense like almost like an unconfidence, maybe.
Hmm.
Like you just could sense that people are like, okay, it's going to kind of go back here, and you're going to have this huge front lawn, and then you're going to have this view, right? Kind of what you'd see, kind of maybe what we would expect, um, but not really. Like we kind of wanted to. It's not like we wanted to be shocked, but we kind of wanted. It felt a little expected, like a
Right.
little cliche, And so
Hmm.
when we pulled up, like, Tom is super enthusiastic, right? He's psyched to be out in nature. So that's the first thing, right? Like you're like you get like this a connection or sense, like walking down the path. We haven't even gotten to this to where it's going to go, right? Like he literally was the first person that we had up here that he walked right up to the edge, like literally to the edge, where I mean it doesn't drop off like you'd fall and die. It's like you could walk down the slope, but he walked right up to the edge. He pulled a tape measure out of his pocket. He handed the other end to Edward. So we're basically like the slope runs parallel to the valley.
Right.
So it's not very zigzaggy. I mean it's not perfectly straight, but he took basically what is now the right corner of the living room on the view side, and he handed it, and he ran the tape measure about 115 or 120 feet down or right at the line of the slope, and said, "This is where it should go." And I remember my wife and I were like, "Whoa!" Like again, like to me, I think there's a difference between like cocky and confidence, right?
Sure.
Like Tom, like we had looked at the book, we had looked at the work, we had met him, we had met Edward, like you could tell like he's been in this situation so many times. He's looked, he's identified it. And, we had never, usually like in our house, we had a front yard, we had a side yard, and we had a backyard, right?
Yeah.
And in the forest, it doesn't really work like that. So the idea was, okay, your front yard is the view.
Hmm.
And if we can get you as close as possible while still being within, the county regulations to the slope, and then your front yard's really going to become like the entry sequence, not a traditional front yard. And he could tell by the way the trees were growing on the slope. He's like, you're going to have to hire a geotech. It's going to be expensive, but it's going to be worth it if we can get this. If you're willing to do it, there was never like you have to do it or we're out. Like it was like
Hmm.
if you're willing to do this, this is where we think it should be. And it completely like we were like I remember leaving like you're kind of terrified, excited. You're like, what's a geotech?
What's a geotech?
And it's not something like we didn't deal with that with our house. So
Yeah.
I think my wife and I were like, yeah, I think this is it. Like this is the group. Like we like the confidence. We like the sort of like got right to it, sort of saw it, and then I think there was, and then I think we went through all like the AIA contract and all that, and then later, so then we're like into like I think we're into like 2009 spring two because they were busy. They had a lot of you got to kind of get in the queue, right?
Right.
But he made it pretty clear. He's like, hey, if you want to, if he's like, this is a great project for us, right? Like we love designing houses for families in nature. I think we had kind of like a good rapport creatively. My vibe was like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Like, I'm going to give you some ingredients. Like, we kind of cooked. In my world, like, it would be a creative brief, in the architectural world, it's a program.
Right.
Just
Yeah, yeah, right.
similar things, different. My wife and I spent some time kind of going through our current house, thinking about like future need and put together sort of like a ballpark square footage of like program needs, 3 bedrooms for the kids, bedroom master for us, detached office. What we did know from our current house is we really wanted this to be more connected to nature, less rooms. Tom likes really smaller rooms for the boys to kind of push folks out into the communal area.
Hmm.
Uh, and and so and the studio was in there, right? Um, the studio was always part of the original vision. It just got built after, but so I remember we wrote a check, for like the deposit to get going, and I don't think writing the check was scary because I mean it was a little scary because we were balancing multiple mortgages and things, but it wasn't scary in a sense of like we had enough like trust and confidence at that point that we were ready to go. We knew that it. I remember we went in. I think it was like summer. It was like spring 2009. I remember we got kind of like Tom's first like sketch. Like
Hmm.
I think he was in New York and he emailed over like a hand drawn sketch, like an
Okay.
elevation and a floor plan.
Okay.
So by then they had kind of digested the program, everything. It was like it was like I mean you guys know it's like a pen, like a I don't know what kind of pencil or what kind of like, but it's pretty raw, right?
Yeah.
And it's and it had we were like super excited. So I think we actually went on a road trip to Montana to Yellowstone.
Hmm.
And when we came back, when we visited the Chicken Point cabin on our
Oh,
way,
cool. Nice.
we got lost. It's kind of a tricky spot to find. And I remember, like, oh, it's like super exciting. Like you see it in the book, and then, architecture is really meant you need to be there to see. Like you get an
Yeah.
idea from the book, but until you're
Yeah.
there. And so we got back and we had our first meeting like in person where they like showed us multiple different schemes, sort of uh like a barbell scheme where it's like living room at one end, kitchen in the middle, bedrooms at one end,
Hmm.
one where there's like it's like there's only so many different there's only like a limited number of floor plans, right? for for this like long bar shape. And
Right.
and it was funny because as clients, they were thinking, you're looking at like I remember like we were looking at each other like, oh shit, like I can swear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Of
yeah, yeah.
course.
We were kind of like, oh, like this can't be right, like on the first try. So then you kind of, we had like the big, printouts and they had in the room and everything, and they had the materials and so we left that day, and that was the first time we were in the office. It was pretty amazing, like big room, and you know, it's the story of like how it all like everything makes sense. So we took it home. I think it was like a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks and we kind of came back with honestly, I think pretty minimal. Like we knew, like the elevation was like we knew, like okay, this makes sense. This house is just basically gonna kind of slide into the site, and it's gonna kind of disappear in the trees. And
Hmm.
you have this very long horizontal bar contrasted by all these vertical trees, and we didn't even. I mean, I liked the steel, and I also liked the concrete, but we weren't quite there yet in terms of like we knew, like I didn't have a rendering in my head looking at it, but I remember we came back with some notes, and obviously, I mean, work in design, so like I can open up the PDF, bring it into Photoshop, or comment. So I'm sure they love that, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure if
Please
a
add
client is
hipped
like,
roof here.
yeah, right. Oh, can you redline this to death for us? Uh, um, no, but it was, I think, it was clear early on for my wife and I that like I was going to be kind of the bridge between them, and then I was going to communicate with her on comments. I was,
Hmm.
and just to keep it moving. And also, I think that spirit of like, hey, like I'm not hiring you to sit over your shoulder and tell you how to be an architect. Like I'm not an architect. I think for us, it's like we wanted this to be like a space like we had never lived in before. We want to entertain friends. I want to be able to bring clients. You know, um, you guys are the expert at that. Like as long as it has sort of the fundamental ingredients that we need to live.
Yeah.
And it's, I think the tricky thing too is like the kids are like, growing up and you're not designing a house for tomorrow. You're designing a house for forever.
Hmm.
Right. And so it's as a client, I think there's like that temptation, like, to kind of pull references and things of things that are trendy, maybe
Hmm.
like things, this is like pre Pinterest, but I think we're at this bridge between pulling, like cutting things literally out of magazines and looking online. And, I think the thing we both liked about the work from Olson Kundig was that it kind of, I mean, they definitely have an aesthetic, but there is a timeless aesthetic where there's a belief that it gets better over time and it's
Hmm.
not done when you move in. And I think for us, that was really important because, this was probably like by far the largest expense we will ever outlay.
Yeah.
And we wanted it to be the forever house. So,
Yeah.
we went back and forth and then, so then I think 2000, we at the time we were designing it, like you're paying like, you're paying fees and
Sure.
it's expensive, but the reality was one thing we learned when we were talking to a bunch of people was that pretty much everybody charges the same thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Most people are not that far off from each other.
Yeah, I mean, so it's and maybe that gave me some comfort knowing like, okay, whether I hire this person or this firm or this, it's like I'm probably going to end up spending like the amount
Right.
no matter
Yeah.
the path. So
Right.
why not go with the one you really, love and feel good about? And so we kind of figured, my wife and I kind of figured out like our agreement, like as a family, as a couple, was that like this is a huge project, but we weren't going to financially let it kill us,
Smart.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
as we were going to go. So if it took longer, we probably end up spending more money than we would if we did it quicker. But we didn't want to upset our day to day
Hmm.
life. Like kids go to school, go on trips,
Hmm.
like not, we didn't want to stop breathing like as a family for
Yeah.
this. So we definitely paid more. And it definitely took longer because, they have other projects and, um, it's a long haul. So I think, we were pretty much done. We were pretty much done by, in terms of design, like 2011, 2012. I think we went in for permitting a little bit earlier than maybe we needed to, but they were changing the building code from triple or from double to triple
I
glaze,
see. So
right?
getting it in was important.
But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we got it in, and we extended and we extended and we
Yeah.
extended. I
Yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
think we were on our final extension. Like we had like I think we had like
Yeah.
90 days to
Yeah.
like fully be in the ground, and there was a contractor that had worked on the rolling huts, and we had got three bids, you know, um, there's the like strangely super low bid. And
Which I hope you didn't go with.
no, well,
Yeah.
no, I'll tell you the story. So there's the strangely low bid. There's like there's the kind of alarmingly more than you'd think as a client for the middle bid, and then there's like the high bid,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not going to name names, but so the low bid, of course, sounds great, right? Like who doesn't want the low bid?
It's red flag.
Yeah, asterisk.
Yeah.
Um, so and we knew. I mean, what eventually ended up happening is we ended up going with the high bid contractor
Oh.
build the house, and the high bid contractor, like that's what the house actually ended up costing.
Yeah.
Like they knew,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we were like, I think we were super fortunate. And I think for homes like this or homes that are done now, like it's, I think like there's no way we could build the house today for that. Like there's no
Oh, the
way.
cost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's gone. So we did a little pre-construction with the low bid contractor,
Huh.
and the project manager that we talked to was fantastic. But when we were I remember because I think what happened was Olson Kundig sort of supervised getting some initial numbers from all three.
Yes.
So this is schematic, right? So we're
Yeah.
cleared of schematic, and the the middle and the high bids came in pretty in a timely fashion, which I think is
Indicative of what's to come.
yeah, for people listening to this that are thinking about going through this, uh, the low bid took the longest,
Interesting. Interesting.
and basically what happened was we we did some pre-construction, so there was money outlay, like pretty like in the low tens of thousands, but not a ton, but like just and then literally on the day we were issued, on the day we were issued, I think like the go ahead from the county to proceed. I had a meeting on site with the project manager on the low bid, and he's like, "I'm leaving."
Yeah.
Something went south, and we really didn't have a lot of contact with the head person. This was just the project manager we were dealing with to kind of get.
Sure.
So our faith was like gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like church exploded, and we're like standing there, and we're like, this doesn't feel good, because
It doesn't feel good.
like everything else was great. Like
Yeah.
Olson, everything, Tom, everything is smooth. So, so we went back to Olson Kundig and we just said, and I don't know if it's like the the myth of the low bid, or if it was just a weird circumstance with this person leaving, but it wasn't gonna. There's no way it was ever going to be built for that number, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. We
uh,
find that oftentimes with the low bid, and this might have been the case with you, or maybe not, kind of who knows. But a lot of the times it's low because they're not accurately pricing the real
They're
cost.
leaving a lot of things out.
And,
yeah,
it's obviously it's a way from a, I guess, business standpoint to just get your foot in the door on their side.
and
And also
yeah,
sometimes more practically, for those kinds of contractors, it takes a lot of time, or it takes more time to actually look through the drawings and think about and calculate and be accurate. It's much faster, which is contrary to what happened to you, but it's faster to kind of just throw in a number. So,
yeah.
but it's hard. I mean, I understand it from the client's perspective, because it's like when their numbers are that different, it's really tempting to go with a low one and say, well, even if it increases a little bit, I'll be
There's so
okay.
much.
But usually as you kind of said, it's indicative of not just a number, but a workflow, attentiveness, all that other stuff.
It was kind of like, it was like at that moment you kind of like, oh, you're like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
but we quickly regrouped,
Yep.
you know,
Nice.
and our feeling was as clients, and for me, like from a design perspective was that we're paying this fee to Olson Kundig, and so we're investing in their vision of our program, I guess, right?
Hmm.
And so for me, it was always very important. Like, how do we make sure in like the time allotted that we save the design that they created, right?
Hmm.
Meaning like we're not gonna value engineer everything out that we've already paid for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so we quickly recoiled. They kind of presented two options. One was the high bid, so that was, and then another was like kind of a competitor in town that was starting to do more residential work, and we looked at that. There was a lot of wanting to, because we investigated both,
Hmm.
a little bit more thoroughly this time, and there was more of a need to kind of change a lot of the design from one of them um, in a way that they thought it would be better built,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
but what was interesting was that I kind of felt like suddenly like this new number was way higher than the original high number. Like, so between the two, the new sort of player was, wanted to change a lot of like how it was going to be built, and it was going to be like it was going to be a much like their low number was higher than the original high number,
I see.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, and they do great work, but I think the other contention that we had was the bank. Like we weren't writing a check, we weren't paying the cash for the entire project, so we had to, you guys know, I mean, like this is post 2007, 8, so like
Yeah. It's interesting times.
it was brutal, and a lot of the houses that people built where they were getting like too close construction loan, where they were giving out they were affording tons of money for these builds, and then they were appraising once the house was built to
Hmm.
then set the mortgage, and then like people walked away because it
Yeah.
wasn't worth as much. And I talked to like 10 banks. I mean, I don't know that. I mean, I'm pretty sure saying that probably a lot of Wilson Kundig projects don't have to deal with banks. Um, we did, and I
Yeah.
think one of the things that we learned is that like the bank doesn't care if it's Spanish Revival or
Right.
Frank Gehry.
Yeah.
Uh, the bank wants to know, can I sell it if things go south?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many, and so we've got like super big houses up here that are, double, triple our square footage, but their cost per square foot's lower,
Yeah.
right? Which is very sexy to the bank.
Yes.
I've got a big house with a low, so now I've got a small house with a
Yeah.
very high cost per, not, I don't think our house was like insanely high but it was definitely not normal. And so then you have like special circumstance asterisk on your project at the bank, which is that's not the asterisk you want to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
It's unfortunate that I don't think well-designed homes, design and or architecture more specifically, is valued in the sense that you're kind of talking about. It's not really part of that calculation most of the times.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we were down the street, we were down the road with one bank, like almost to the end where I think it's who's the person at the bank that like, they're like they are almost like the final say,
Hmm.
but they do sort of the final math and they do the risk assessment. And they were just like, it's too risky, right? So
Yeah.
then they referred us to another bank, and literally like so it turned out so the president of the bank, um, he he and his wife had actually made an offer on a Tom Kundig house, like that was being resold, and then he had Dow Belt. So at the time it was Schuchard Dow, and now it's Dow Belt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, have them do a project. So he was very familiar with
Interesting.
the like super high quality of Dow Belt, and obviously Olson Kundig. So literally, I got like 20 minutes with him at the headquarters downtown Seattle. I'm like having to go in and do like a pitch.
Right.
Like this is like we've already paid for the plans. We're about to take off. Like, can we keep going? Right. And so like I'm nervous as hell. Like I brought in a couple of Tom's. I think at that time there was like Houses, the original book we had, and then like Houses 2, the sequel. So I've got that thing like flagged, with relevant sized projects designed by Shukar Dow. And what you learn is like the bank wants the assurance that this architect has done X amount of projects, and they've done X amount of projects with the bank, with the builder.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The more sort of assurance that they have that these are legitimate parties. So I went in not knowing that he knew either Olson Kundig or Shukar Dow.
Oh, interesting.
No, but like I had no idea. Like I'd never met the guy, but our kind of loan officer was like, "I'll get you, an audience with this guy in his office in the, skyscraper downtown." So I went in there with the books and the whole thing, and just like, this is it. It wasn't a Hail Mary, but it was like, and he just, he looked at it and he kind of like, he's like, okay, he's like, don't miss a payment.
Nice.
Like
Nice.
don't but he's like, I can tell you right now that the minute this thing is done, it's going to be, you and your family are going to be like, it's a great investment for you and your family. As a bank, we can stand behind this. Don't miss a payment. Don't make me look bad. Like we're going to give this the go ahead. So
Awesome.
I
Good
was
for
like,
him.
I was like, yeah. And, I sent him a nice note, and, even like like the mortgage guy was like, it's just tricky, right? Because we had to get comps on houses and houses incarnation. And then there was no house incarnation designed by Olson Kundig. So like we were getting comps on, and there's very few resales, obviously, of Olson Kundig houses.
Mm-hmm.
But the further you get away from your house to where that comp is, they take that comp and then they cut it, they
Yeah.
reduce.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening is they give you a loan to value, right? And I think usually it's like 70-30 in the good times. Like they'll give you 70% and you put 30% down.
Mm-hmm.
I think ours was like 60-40 or 55. Anyway, so what ended up happening is we just had to put a ton of money down up front,
Goodness.
which we weren't really prepared. We weren't mentally or financially preparing to do. Which kind of messed with our philosophy of don't upset the day-to-day.
It's hard.
Sure.
So we cleared that hurdle. We ended up we ended up, Dow Bill, Jim Dow and Tom have worked together for a long time. So there was that relationship there. I think if we thought at the beginning of the 3 bid that we're like, oh my God, we could totally do that, or the bank was going to give us that amount, like it wouldn't have been a conversation probably. We wouldn't have gone, but it was definitely the best. It was like they were the only ones who could honestly pull it off. Yeah. And they did. And so we broke ground in like, I think it was like, there was a lot of work. We had to put in a well, and that was the other thing. Like, so we had to put in a well, and then we had to like do a well test, to like we were broken ground, and we had to have like sprinklers in our house, but the fire department has to come and they do like a well test. And if the well doesn't produce, the bank doesn't give you the draw and you're done. So, right. There's so many little things that even if you have money in the world, like if there's no water, there's no water.
Yeah.
Right. We had a tree fall down that was in our forest management area. So it wasn't part of our developed area. It was in March and it pooled water, and someone from the county who lived in Carnation drove by and saw water along the main road, like creating kind of a river almost. Mm-hmm. And they didn't like stop and talk to us. They just sent us an anonymous letter, and then we had to hire a wetlands expert,
Mm.
and we had to pay like 20 grand to mitigate a wetland caused by a tree that fell down and created a pool of water during like the rainiest March we've ever had. And so there was like there were hiccups.
Yeah. Let me ask you, so during the design phases when you're working heavily with Olson Kundig and the architect, was there anything about that process that surprised you? And with knowing the fact that obviously you are probably not the typical client in the sense that you've thought about a lot of what it means to be a good professional in a creative sense and a good client on that end. But even with that said, was there anything that surprised you or things that you weren't expecting?
I think that I didn't really know the architecture process, like concept, schematic, design development, CA, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my world, like concept, design, there's really not schematic. Like
Yeah.
you go, and then there's delivery, or not really like construction administration
Yeah.
of it. But I think the biggest surprise was like there's I think in my mind there's sort of like first of all, like I love the conceptual develop, like the sketching, like I love that. Like in fact we have we have like Tom's original pencil, like elevation and floor plan framed in our house. I don't think he's like, well, we don't really like give these like to I mean, it's got like the stickers,
The drafting dots.
Yeah. And it's, but it's really, I think one of the things we loved about the office was the fact that like he and Edward are there taking it from end to end. I mean, other people come in, we have structural engineers and quality control to make sure like, what they've drawn, like that the drawer's gonna, like if you open up these three things at the same time, they're not gonna all like run it,
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's like day to day, I'm having conversations with Edward. I can email Tom. Tom's super responsive. We're this team. I think the line, like the concept to schematic is pretty tight.
Mm-hmm.
What we saw conceptually and what was like framed in our house is like what got built.
Yeah.
The phase between schematic and design development is probably probably the biggest sort of leap, to me.
This is true.
Because you have an idea of sort of like, okay, this is gonna be a cake. like all the ingredients are telling me like I'm looking at a cake, but it's until you see design development where you're like, oh man, this is like, you start like all the senses light up. And I think there were things that we would see from a floor plan in schematic that you're like, oh, good. They included there's a bench when you come in the door to sit down and take your shoes off. But when you see how that bench is actually designed in DD, and you see that they're pulling through this design language in the whole house, like we have a huge cantilever off the living room. There's a lot of things in the house that move sort of on wheels or rails that parallel the house that tie to the office.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think from like the hardware, every scale of their work is consistent from like the smallest detail to like the big move.
Right. Yeah.
And even for us, I think even for us, for like a pretty small house and not a second home, but like a house, like that was the other thing. It's like we live here, is that, there's a few kind of like the cantilever is a big move that responds to the site. How you get up into the house from the ramp is like also a big move. The door is a big move. I mean, I think the biggest move that maybe is unexpected is it wouldn't you wouldn't maybe consider an architectural big move. It's just that like literally like we've got like 65 feet or so of like the nature channel from our living room and our kitchen every day.
You're right.
You know,
Right.
with the way the glazing is, and so there's a it's a very tight house. Like
Hmm.
there's not a lot of extra. There's not like sort of. I would say the room we probably use now least out of the whole house is probably the den, and that's because our kids are older. Like they're two are off. One's out of college, one's in college, one's going to high school. So we're not in there all playing video game. But when people come home, you know, um, that's a used room. Or like during COVID, it turned into a 24-hour fitness.
Yeah, fair.
Because you couldn't. But it's very. We use. I would say like we use every single room every single day, and it's. So I think it's back to that. I think what Tom does very well, what the firm does very well, is they're very strategic about editing
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
to us because this is a very livable home for my wife and I once our youngest kid goes away to school and it's just us, and our dogs and our cat. It's one floor,
Yeah.
the Roomba can like, has
The room
gone
back.
in a few hours. And really, I think like a lot of Tom houses, the house kind of pushes you outside. So like winter, rainy, snowy, but first day of spring, our 1,200 pound, steel pivot doors open, and our 40-foot ramp becomes basically like a deck.
Hmm.
Because we're so close to the slope, we don't have a deck off the front of the house, but that our backyard, front yard
Right.
is
Right.
like a whole nother room. So um, I think design developed like so much, like the studio magically grew from one story to two stories.
It's a very interesting. Both things that you've said are interesting because I do find that sometimes clients, when you get through concept design and even SD, there's kind of the sensation that maybe most of the work is done and you're close to the finish line.
Yeah.
But as any architect will tell you, no, that's DD is actually one of the in my view, the phases where the most obviously development happens because you're taking something that's just schematic and you're making it into like very real and very detailed. And that jump between those two is not something that a lot of folks see. They see a nice floor plan or a nice sketch and they think, oh well, there it is. It was to go build it. But there's like a lot of other stuff that has to get fleshed out.
I mean, I guess like the next surprise for me was the construction. Like because you spend so much time trying to like wiggle this circle into like the building code square. Like you try to it's like Jello, right? And like you've got a circle, they've got a square. They need to see enough of a square to like sign off on it.
That's a good way to put it.
And then you get in there and you're like, oh crap, like this could become a circle again, like during, and that's the other part. Like I mean, there's a lot of steel, there's big, glue lamps, we didn't have, originally the roof was like completely flat. And, I remember like the county was like, where's your gutters?
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're like, and so as a client, I'm thinking, wow, that sounds like a really expensive comment. Because any comment from the county before, I mean, it has to be sort of addressed, but then like the addressing of that, if it's not good, is an expensive comment. And
Yes.
so like we have the den and the master bath cantilever as well, but out, right? They're not on. So a very minimal part, like the most minimal footprint of our house sits on concrete. It's very minimal. It's been designed and engineered to float as much as possible, but use as little as concrete as possible, right? So we had like different elevation or roof height for the den and the master because the roof was going to be flat. Well, once we needed to slightly pitch the roof, we brought the height of the den and the master up to the same. So it was one pitched roof.
Yeah.
But I was thinking like, oh man, like that, you can do that after. It's sort of like the teachers signed off on the homework, but now you're still changing the answer, right? I was like, I didn't realize you could do that. And what's so crazy to me is that they spend so much time. You know, we're in an unincorporated area, so like we don't get our permit from the city where we in the town we live. We get it from the county, and because we're an unincorporated, we're on many acres. Like there's way more environmental standards, right? Drainage reviews, you know, like impervious surface. Like it's tough. It's like we picked we went up against like Mike Tyson, like, and so yeah, like, and we changed some of the structural engineering, and some materials mid-flight. You know, like that's not, you don't want to be on the plane and the pilot says like, hey, the wings might disappear for a little bit. We're putting new wings, like, and so those things were surprises. But I think the other thing that was like a surprise was just I felt, I mean, some things got way more expensive. Like you go in and like all the doors go from like X to Y. Like, wait a minute, they were X when they went in from the drawing and now they cost, you know, like, so there's those kind of things. But I think every decision that we made, I felt like, well, it got more expensive, but it got better. And I think the thing about doing this is that time heals a lot of those client construction change order pains. Like we're removed, you know, 6 years from this, and you know, the regret of not doing it to what was designed would be greater.
Yeah.
For it was painful though. Like it's financially it's like, it's sort of like you think the match is over and you keep getting hit a little, you know, for a little bit. But if you take a long view on it, you know, I think, you know, the big sell that I don't think we realized, you can't really see in the books, you know, is that when you live there every day, like when I walk in to get the broom out of this closet, like the clearance on the switch to where the door opens is so surgically orchestrated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe someone who doesn't care about that, it's not gonna like, but as a design person, like you see every single decision. And because it took a long time, like I really, I know like where every last move was made. And so when I'm moving through that house and interacting, like, and it's funny, like our kids that are away for school or come, you know, you're in a dorm and you come back to your house and our youngest has spent the most amount of the time in the house that are older too, but they're like, wow, you know, like they really appreciate, you know, I mean, it's kind of like, I remember, after we moved in, like you feel like you're kind of living in a really nice hotel, like a really, really nice, you know, or you're on vacation, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, we couldn't have done it, you know, I mean, Olson Kundig was the right partner. Dalbelt was the right partner. The level of craft and care and the shorthand between those two is exceptional. And, you know, we're not experts in either of those groups do. But I think for me, I tried to be a good communicator, my wife and I, and we tried to let them do their work. Like,
yeah. Well, because you've been on the other side of it.
Oh yeah, man. It's like, and there's moments, right? Sure. Like there's moments, but I think, I think Tom says like if you get a good bill, if you get a good client and you get a good, contractor and you have a great design, like magical things can happen. And it's easy to look at projects, like drive by a house and go, oh man, what happened? Like aesthetically there, or any building,
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's true what, you don't know,
Yeah.
like, was it the county? Was it the
Yeah.
client? Was it the
There's a
builder?
thousand things, probably more than a thousand things that could have happened along the way that
Yeah.
caused it to go one way or
Yeah.
the other. I think
Was
what
it,
you're highlighting, you were saying earlier about kind of what surprised you is you got to a certain phase and you thought, okay, then this has been settled, good. Now onto the next, okay, that's settled, good. But instead, things that maybe you had hoped and everyone would hope was figured out end up getting kind of undone or at the very least questioned at some point. And I think the one of the biggest differences maybe between a lot of clients' mindsets versus the architects is that architects expect all of that to happen. And even if they convey it to the client, everyone hopes they get to be the lucky one where things work out better than everyone else. And it's just very rare. And, the phrase of it's a marathon and not a sprint, I think applies because it is a marathon. And if those three people that you mentioned, the architect, client, and contractor, or I'd say just the architect and client, they aren't good at going on that journey together, then that's where you have problems. Because it's going to be a journey no matter what you do, and it's going to be a marathon. If you're doing something interesting and unique and have a site like yours, it's not always going to be smooth sailing,
no, yeah, I think and I think the other thing is like, as you guys know, so much of how it ends up depends on the communication
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
the builder and all the subs, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
but suddenly like you've got people, I mean, we finished the house was finished, we moved in, but there was still like 2 months of, stuff or so. And so you're waking up in your pajamas and you've got like 15, 20 people outside, and,
You gotta,
and I think there's a great amount of, I mean, we like Tom and Edward Edward was out here with our project manager from Dowbuilt, and we were, at these key moments during construction. And then Tom was out at like sort of like these milestones, like on site, right? But you're like I'm on even when we just had the land, like I had two chairs up here and a picnic table. Like I was up here, I called it like, oh, like Lou's going up and having a mental cigarette. Like I would just come up here and spend time up here. Our kids came up, during saw like the whole thing, and it's quite a miracle that anything happens, right?
yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
like there's so many things, but for me, and for my wife, I think it helped. Like it was literally a forest through the trees project because the site was so kind of left in not a great spot when we got it. And I think what I would tell people is don't look for the perfect site. Like the perfect site, look for the perfect site, but the perfect site may not be what you think the perfect site is.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, because we've completely transformed, restored, healed. I think Tom uses that a lot, like healed the site. Like we've spent a lot of time, and it's not just like right before the house is done. It's like ongoing, and we're doing that with I think I mentioned to you guys that we ended up buying the site next to us. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a long, if it's like the Barbie dream house, like for the forever house, like it's a long engagement, it's a long relationship, and just like the house changes over time, and especially like I think Tom houses or Olson Kundig houses, because they literally are transforming, and interacting with the owner, but also nature, but with time. And if someone showed me a picture of this today, like we're 6, 7 years into being here, and like we just did landscaping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not full on, but I think and like when that's sort of revealed, it's like wow, then in turn makes the experience of coming in and out of the house even more magical. And then obviously the studio. I know we're at 12. I don't know. Can
Oh,
you
you're
guys go?
good.
Are you good until 12:30?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay,
So
cool.
we
We can keep chatting.
but I think, it's like the comment about the power of the street, right?
Yeah.
Um, in some ways you kind of don't want to know. Like I remember talking to people who had gone through this and like, either survived still being married as a couple
Yeah. Yeah.
or saying like, I would never ever do it again,
Yeah.
and like my wife and I had moments where we were like, do we just go buy a house and just be, like
Yeah.
not because of Dow or Olson Kundig or anything, but just like it's an ultra. It's like it's not just a marathon. Like it's like an ultra marathon, like through the desert with no water some days,
It's
and
a
it's
triathlon.
Yeah.
yeah. You're like, wait a minute, I don't really like swimming in there, but it is about perseverance, and I think you know there's the financial part of like, oh God, we got to like finish this because we got to like, we paid a lot of money. And so, but I think your point, David, is really true is like, no matter if you can write a check for the whole thing or whether you have to go to the bank or how much money you do or do not have, like the roller coaster is still in play.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're really signing up for are some low lows and some high highs. But when you move in and you're living there, hopefully hopefully there's more highs than lows.
Sure.
I think for most people, probably the lows are because of either financial or like miscommunication.
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
the highs should be because it's a great place to be with friends and family and to be, literally connected to nature. Like being here feels way healthier than like walking up the street next to 20 houses that are exactly the same color. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that other than like, on a nice day, my wife and I will like literally walk like 550 feet all the way to our gate at the entrance and back, and sometimes multiple, and just go for a walk. And we're still here. Like we're still on the side,
Yeah.
and it's like you feel like you're living in a park. And so I think the gift, I mean, I realize like not everybody can do this, but I think people can bring some of like the joy of this process in many different scales. Like you can have that through like where you decide to live or things in your house that connect you back, to like living near nature. I mean, even if you're living in like the city, I think there's always like little design things that can bring you the joy. And I think for me and for my wife, we're working with Tom and Edward and Olson Kundig, like there's a lot of joy in this house because I think like we did it all together.
That's awesome.
It was a long journey. I think we all persevered. Like they had to be patient with us for taking like probably longer than it takes, more other clients. But I think in the end, they saw our dedication to what they created for us. And for me, I think that's what I fight for in like projects that I do, like the messy middle, like the project gets going, it's super exciting. You see the finish line, but like there's always this stuff. And I think that getting through that stuff is the biggest determination of how the story ends, because literally for us, like we kind of thought like the story was over once we moved in, but it really just started, like we had Tom out to visit the studio and, he's been out and we've had, we host like Olson Kundig interns to come out and see it. And it is to the point now where like Edward will be like, why don't you just tell the story? Like you live it, and I think if you can tell that story, it means that you are really engaged. And I feel like Tom attracts creative or clients, like myself, that really I think there's two types of engagement. There's like helicopter parent or there's like collaboration,
Right.
And so, I wanted to be, I knew because we have friends that are actually building their own Tom Kundig house out in Garrison, New York. So
Wow.
and um, and we met them through this, we've met like other owners of other Olson Kundig houses. There's kind of like a group, I guess. It's not like a support group. It's just like people that have been through it. And, it's all similar stories, whether it's an Olson Kundig house or not. I think it's super healthy to connect with other people. And I would advise anybody that decides to do any project with any architect to like seek out and kind of like the contractor bid thing, like be wary of the really bad stories and be wary of the really like over enthusiastic stories.
Sure. Sure. You might,
So
if your email's out there, you might get some emails after this recording.
okay, yeah.
People
Like,
saying like, "Can you talk to me for half an hour?"
I'll end up being like it'll be, I don't know, what do they call that? You guys had one on your podcast that the
An,
guy
an owner's rep.
yeah, like the wedding planner.
Yeah.
The pre-owner's rep role. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm curious if you had to do this whole experience again, this whole project, is there anything that you would do differently?
Save more money.
Have more money.
Yeah, always more money. It's interesting now because, like I said, I think you spend a lot of like because we're planning it for my like long haul. My wife and I are here, right? And then with the kids and everything, I think there could be an overestimation from a client perspective of and I'm sure my kids will listen to this and I'll probably get but like to not over engineer it for the kids, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
like I know there's people who, maybe over customize because, there's like this wondrous time,
Mhm.
like for parents when the kids are small, where you're like, oh, you want a castle in your room or you want to, this or that. And, they do, if you do it right, they do grow up and they move on to their life. And I think it's probably one of the parts of the project that like the bedrooms are basically like the exact same. There's a democracy
Mhm.
of like they can put stuff on their walls. They can, but it's basically the same room three times.
Sure.
And they're almost exactly the same. One of the things with the house is that as you walk from one end to the other, you're kind of walking through the forest. So each of the kids' rooms have a really big window with their own sort of slice of their own view. But I remember even at the beginning, we had talked with Tom about like, do we create like a great room, like a big kind of like room with like moving walls, so like the kids could it's like almost like college where you have like a sleeping porch,
Hmm.
with like everybody kind of sleeps and then they have their own. But the bank did not like that because it turned into like a two-bedroom house.
Right.
And they need the room, but I think we didn't over customize the rooms, which I think was a good thing because now
Yeah.
it's what's really we put pretty much most of the detailing money into the kitchen, into the living room, and into like the ramp and the door and the hardware and I mean pretty much everything except for the appliances was made. Like even the entry with the bench and the interior steel, like everything was made by somebody, like
Yeah.
somebody. And so I think my advice would be to just think if people, like you're not designing for the day you like today, you're designing for the future, and you really have to design it for the people that are going to live there for the longest.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think is the key. I mean, and now I know we're transitioned to talk about the studio, but like um, it's there were like there were going to be some there were I think as the owner you're kind of like, what's the thing, you know what I mean, like what's the big thing, like what's the big move,
Hmm.
you know? And I think there's a danger in having that question before you solve like programming and things. Like to me,
Hmm.
um, and that's where the office came out of. Really, the office came out of a client generated question that then had a response. It wasn't like, you know, I mean, I hear this a lot, like from people, like you know, when your project's in the New York Times or any big forum where people can comment,
Mm-hmm.
you know, don't read the comments
Sure.
because unless you're there, unless you're spending the money in the meetings, understanding the kind of landscape of like the design problems you have to solve, you really making comments about things. You don't really have all the information about
Yeah.
why how those decisions are made and everything. And I think, we hear, you hear comments like with about the big moving things, the kinetic things, and I think like we know people, we're friends with people who have houses that have these things, and I don't think any one of them was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be the guy that has the big moving wall
I see.
or
I
the
see.
rolling office.
Yeah.
I think it's really up to Tom and the firm to investigate all the vectors of the project and figure out like if something like that makes sense, it's coming out of the design problem and it's not something that like you're not building. We didn't build the whole project around it. Like we didn't go in thinking, okay, we're going to buy this land and we're going to have a train. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
like,
yeah. No, I do understand what you're saying now when you mentioned like what is the thing, and I think there is a risk probably in any creative or design endeavor of even for the designer and also the client of forcing this external kind of random idea that someone might have, and if it gets worked into the project, great. But there is a danger when you do that the project is not being led from the correct headspace and the right direction. It's not natural. It actually when you're doing it, you feel it's unnatural, at least for us. And you look at it you're like we're forcing it. This doesn't. Where's this coming from? you know.
yeah, exactly. I don't know how you want to get it. I mean, I can just talk about it. I know we have like 20 minutes, but
Yeah. Well, so yeah. Let's talk about the office because the office was always part of the program, and so
yeah,
people will obviously look at the links in the house and everything online. But people listening might assume, okay, well, the office is somewhere in that floor plan of the house, but it ended up being a detached structure. Not only a detached structure, but one that is 2 stories and is on railroad tracks. So,
yeah,
uh, how did that happen?
yeah. So after, so we'd gotten a sketch, and on the sketch there was kind of like very roughly traced out like track with this like square building. So like, oh, that's interesting. So I actually I went in and had a separate meeting with Tom about the office. So we got the master plan of the house and everything all figured out, right? That was the priority. But I went in and met with him and specifically to talk about this on the office. And he at the time it's just like also one of those things like I think he talks about like architecture is evolutionary not revolutionary right and things build upon themselves so they had done this other project for another client where there was a different but similar design problem where they investigated the option of like when family came to stay could they have a kind of a central building and then could they have some outbuildings that could move on rails or tracks to sort of join the mothership or send the
Yeah.
mothership away send the
Yeah.
mother,
Yeah.
and and so they actually had like a little maquette in the office with like a battery and wheels but they Tom and Filter who worked on the kinetic stuff had actually investigated like the engineering and physics behind just moving like a room, like a structure, like bigger than ours, but on rails. And I think it was like 4 horsepower motor around there to run like maybe a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot building.
Oh wow, that's big.
And so Tom was like, well, I know you. So like the owner, me, had said, I've lived in a house with an office in the house. That is not what I want for this, right? So like that's a fact
Okay.
that I'm giving. That's an insight, right, that I'm giving him. And then his response to that, sort of like with Chicken Point, with like, wouldn't it be nice to open up this window to the view,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is, hey, we are doing we're investigating this other project, and we've done some R&D. What if we put your office on rails, so when you want to be, you could just walk out of your master bedroom, which is at the end of the house, onto this platform, and like literal, I guess, railroad platform, and just walk into your office and work and close the door and kind of like, you know, have a separate room. Also, just for like tax purposes, it's a separate entrance, right, to the office. It's not, so there's advantages there, sort of. No, I mean, it's not like a get rich quick scheme, but I think, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then, like, I think what knocked me out of my chair was when I was like, yeah, and then like there's some sort of something we have to figure out, but you could like get in and like interact with it, and then it would literally move and detach, and like physically it would nest with the house. So we have to figure that out. Like, how does it interlock like a puzzle? And then how does it, and then as it moves out, it becomes its own thing, right? So the caboose, like of a train, which aren't really around anymore, was the office of the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of like another insight, right? But a caboose is like long, it's not tall. So this is sort of like taking a caboose and like lifting it up on its end. And the brain was a project we really loved. I really loved. And in the brain, the guy was a director, and he worked upstairs, and then downstairs was his library. So we kind of flipped that a little bit. And I had joked to Tom, I was like, I didn't like, could we do like this is probably, you hear this from clients, it probably like drives you nuts. You need like an extra cocktail on it. But like, you're like, can we do like a mini brain? But not literally like the concrete structure, but like, we sort of like rethink it. So, because the caboose, the conductor worked in the caboose, there was a desk, there was like a bench, it was like a working area, and they would go upstairs in the caboose to the cupola so they could see down the train, right? So in our example, like the house would be the train, the rest of the train, and the caboose is, kind of locked onto the end, and then, and so like, but at that moment it was just one story. We weren't even talking. And he's like, so yeah, what do you think? Like, what if we put your office on rails? I'm like, oh man. Like, how do you unzip, how do you like remove that from your brain once it's planned?
Yeah.
So like, that's the first thought. And then the second thought is like, okay, how am I going to sell this to my wife? Like, because it's like, it's not, according to like the readers of the New York Times, like, why would you need your office to move? Why does it need to be detached? Why couldn't you just walk from your house to a fixed space? Like, where are you going to go to the bathroom? Like, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, I think it goes back to his quote, right? Like, only common things happen when common sense prevails. Like, clearly, this is a jump. Like, this is a leap. I think like you've seen with other like big commercial, like the shed, like the facade of the shed moves, but the shed itself doesn't move, right? Or, I mean, I've seen cabins where they like the owner can push the facade and sort of close or reveal like on track. So it's not,
like sort of extend, but not actually have enclosed programmatic building.
Yeah, and so it's so long story short, so we had it all designed. Like it grew from 1 story to 2 stories between schematic and design development. We actually had it on the permit set. to kind of like do a temperature check with the county.
Yeah.
And it was on there kind of like as a studio, like shed. There's no plumbing, right?
Yeah.
The sort of response was, mm, you know, I don't know if we can help you here because it's not on foundation.
Yeah.
Right.
I was, this is not very interesting in a way, but I'm very curious what happens with approvals because
Well,
there's,
it's like you're building a car. You're not really building a building,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, you're building we had to, because of like the way things were titled and zoned and things like that, we had to do some investigation there. But in terms of like the actual like thing, like there's nothing. I mean, there's no, it's another, like you can't even jello a square into a circle. Like
right,
there's
right.
Yeah.
nothing. And it is like, so one day when we were building it, we put in a gate after we moved into the house just so that people wouldn't like wander down. But one day the gate was open, it was like raining and we were working on building it. Someone from the county drove out. Is the one that basically assesses improvements.
Okay.
And it was literally it was like 5 days to the year that we moved in. And he was not I was like, oh crap, because we're all sitting under the carport having lunch. It was like lunch, and we see the vehicle come down. He's like, I'm not here to like ding you or whatever. It's like, can you give me kind of like, can you tell me what this is, right? And so like on our, like I guess like on our permanent record, like it's recorded as like a 10 by 15 studio on rails that's 2 stories, no plan. So
Yeah.
it's because they need to assess a value so they can charge your property tax.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's not. It's built at or beyond. I mean, it's like over engineered. It's structurally
I'm
engineered. It's
sure.
over like it's. So basically, what we did was the other leap was that I mean, I learned a lot. Like, I think you kind of get, if you're really engaged as the owner, you sort of get, it's not a free education because you're paying the contractor, right? But you get you do get an education in how things are built. So with the house, I learned a lot. We had an amazing site super, who's still a friend to this day, which tells you something. We got along really well. And, I decided for this project because I thought in my mind, okay, it's smaller, I could handle it, that I was going to be the contractor, like the general contractor, not physically building necessarily, but building the team.
Yeah. Yeah.
The money was going to go directly from me to the people building it, and there was going to be an intermediary, and so I'm shouldering that risk. So from the get go, that was once we were ready, that's what we did. And so some of the guys that worked on our house, all the steel work, we basically took the drawings from Olson Kundig and we turned them into a shop drawing. We kind of approached it almost like we were building an object, like building an like industrial design.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
So we sort of converted the drawings to like a Lego book. Like
Right.
you'd get like a Lego book, right? And and every page said like, you need this many pieces. These are the bill of goods,
Right.
fasteners, whatever. And then the Alpine Welding is who I worked with on pretty much all. They sort of took the kinetic genius of Olson Kundig and Phil Turner, and then they made it happen. They were a lot of things to figure out. Just like the house, there's things that happen. So it grew to 2 stories. We found reclaimed rails from the Great Northern, which was the railroad that ran from Seattle to Chicago. It actually had a branch line that came through our town and terminated it in our town. So there was the history of 2 railroads in our town that brought cows for the dairy.
Nice.
And brought mail and and also got lumber, right? And our site, when we excavated, we found rail spikes,
Hmm.
and so they would have brought like temporary rail onto our site to get the trees off the hill, you know. So there was logging railroad history, which we didn't know when Tom pitched it, you know.
Sure.
I mean, um, and so as Tom sort of like handed off this idea to me and to like take it, you know, and run with it and bring it to life, I investigated like more context to bring that
Yeah.
learning to the areas of the design, which I thought could even bring more story. And
Yeah.
so I found a group of guys, or one guy, and he brought a group of guys, some railroad guys, and we built the railroad track. Um, and which is like an education, right? Like BA and you know railroad engineer BS. Maybe it's a BS. Is
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
and then so we did that, and then we basically they built a whole studio steel framed in the shop,
Okay.
and they're pretty much, I would say 90%, 95% of what was drawn by Tom and Edward is what you see behind me. We had to figure out how to bring electrical
Mm.
to a moving thing. The electric company wasn't jazzed about the fact that this wasn't that this permit is different department for electrical than it is for building.
Hmm.
So there's a company called Han A Reels, and they make commercial industrial reels. We had a custom commercial reel made for this project that sits 2/3 under the carriage of the train. We have power running from the house underneath the railroad tracks to the end. And then there's basically like an industrial it's like a big extension cord that basically it's connected to the train. So as it moves from the forest to the house, it pulls the cord out, and when the studio moves back to the forest, it reels it in. So,
Interesting.
and that provides all. But we needed enough ampage and size of the reel, and that required a bigger reel than we thought. And so the reel was going to come through the floor. So then we had to invent a bench,
Nice.
which was not in the original plan. So that was kind of like, but you know, like reverse engineering, like in a caboose, there's always a bench, right?
Nice.
And cabooses originally were made out of plywood, and then you know, they converted to steel.
Mhm.
So the interior of the office, the walls, two walls are pine ply, and pine is, you know, would be part of the context of like landscape here, you know, pine trees, but they also refer to the history of the railroads. We have a mild steel wall on the forest facing view that goes 2 stories, so that becomes a kind of its own kinetic magnetic wall where I can put up work.
Cool.
The desk is 10 feet wide and it cantilevers. It's got the hemmed edge detail. And I think it's like 3/8 steel. It's pretty thick, and it's a huge canvas for work. So like right now I'm talking to you guys, but I have like stuff on my desk that I can move it. And we have one shelf on the first floor. I have some model trains and some pictures and a lot of artifacts. So the office it's like, the function is a studio for me to create and make, but it's also kind of like a rolling museum to the history of the railroads in this area. So when people come over, I mean, I've got like a old telegraph from the Great Northern. I have my great grandfather's original typewriter. He was part of the Mad Men advertising era. So it's a mix of sort of railroad history, some family history and advertising and branding, and then my work. So it's really kind of like, it's like Lou in a box. You know?
So do you get any work done in there, or
not today? No, I do. In fact, like I remember I had a family member come right after I moved in, and they're like, "God, it's like it's like total knolling on my desk." Like
Knolling?
if you had like, I think it's like things organized neatly.
It's knolling, yeah.
Yeah.
It's knolling.
Yeah. If you had a little mini drone doing like aerials, you'd see. And like downstairs, the first floor is kind of like on my desk, it's a little chaotic, and on the wall, there's a lot of stuff. But it's real like downstairs is like kind of like getting dirty, like not in mud, but like like working and like
Hmm.
working through things. But upstairs, so the ladder behind me is like a straight vertical climb.
Wow.
It's kind of like Tom, maybe a little bit of a nod to like Tom's climbing because it's like it's a little, it's totally secure. It's like a steel vertical ladder, but like it's if you don't like heights, probably you're not going up there. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
but I think it's upstairs is a library, so there's a the ladder itself is kind of like it's in the it looks like rails, like it's like a
Hmm.
vertical rail, and then I needed something. It wasn't part of the project originally, but as I was moving in books and stuff, I was like, God, this is like a lot to move upstairs. So the I worked with Alpine Welding, and we created a vertical dumbwaiter,
Oh,
which is
cool.
also like a railroad. Like it's got, but we needed a small enough motor to move this steel basket. It can hold about 35 pounds. So we found out that there's a company in Japan, and they make tiny motors for sushi belts for restaurants.
Oh,
And so, and I had done a lot of travel for this project. It was in the New York Times, and like gone to Japan and traveled around like to Europe and Japan. And I've taken the train across America multiple times on Amtrak. And so there was a lot of learnings about railroads that I didn't know in terms of like safety and operation. And in the Amtrak, if you take Amtrak, for instance, any distance, the dining cars have a dumbwaiter because the stairs are too tight
mhm.
to get things up. So they have a dumbwaiter
Hmm.
to move things up and down. So there's history, there. And so I can literally come in here, put my laptop, my drinks, whatever, book in the dumbwaiter, and then the kinetic control panel, which is off of Burlington Northern, which is used on freight trains, Amtrak. The top lever that you have to interact with controls the dumbwaiter. So there's like an interaction there. And then upstairs is steel bookshelves
Yep.
and the wall up there, the steel wall is blank. And I just when upstairs is really about dreaming and concepting for future things. Downstairs is about,
Getting it done.
working.
Yeah.
That's lovely. That's a lot of work. It's a testament to I think probably who we are to see it through, to take on all of that, and you've certainly learned a lot. I think it's really really cool. And for the people who leave comments saying like, "Why would you do this? Because where do you use the bathroom?" I mean, not to be just dismissive, but frankly, well, I think you're right that they don't know the ins and outs of the whole project. First of all, they don't know you, and then I would also say they just don't get it.
Or you
Um,
got to dream of it all, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and it's. I mean, I don't. We didn't create it for.
yeah, yeah. It's for you,
And
you know.
and I think, um, like you guys know, when you like every single project, however many projects you have going on at the same time, every single project has its own little journey. And for me, the projects start in a reality
Hmm.
that someone has a problem that they want me to help them solve, and that problem usually starts, it's not always in the office. Like I'm not always in the office when that problem comes. I may be walking outside, I may be in the house, but
Hmm.
the studio itself is sort of like going from the intake of the problem to then traveling out here anywhere on the rail, right? To like a little bit of this like land of make believe where we're going into concepting and we're leaving sort of the chaos and noise of all the information that we're being provided or all the information that's out there in the world about that problem, and we're
Hmm.
trying to separate. We're not aggregating. We're getting all that knowledge, but then we sort of like take what we need with us on that journey, and we leave the other stuff behind, and we go out and solve that problem, and then we come back,
Hmm.
right? And I think for me, like it was less. It's less about commuting. I mean, a lot of the headlines are like, he works like on the train where he commutes, but it's less about commuting and more about, I think, adventure. It's more about a journey of creating. Because I don't feel like I am working, but it doesn't feel like it's not a chore to like get in the studio and like drive into the woods. So,
I think that that description is actually really, really well said, especially the bit about it being a problem that you're solving for somebody and the information and kind of leaving out information and being in a certain kind of headspace. I think that's really well said. Yeah.
It's definitely different. I completely acknowledge it, but I think it's, for us, it's not, because it was always planned. It's not like it's not a gimmick. Although I would say that like when the UPS guy pulls up or FedEx, like what the hell is going on? Like, and it definitely, I mean, even when Tom pitched it out as a possibility and we worked through it, he's like, this is gonna be a thing. Like this could be the house as it stands is not necessarily as wild as this.
Sure.
But it was never intended to be like, but because there is a connection to the history and everything, like I've tried like I do with brand work. Brand is about differentiation. It's like the opposite of AI.
Right.
AI is artificial intelligence. Like what I help do for clients is that I help separate them based on things that they can sort of build a moat around their brand castle to defend and own for themselves. So they're not the same as everybody else. And I think this studio in many ways is a calling card for clients who want to work with someone who's already thinking differently about how they approach their work, and I think at the end of the day, like, let's have some joy. Like, let's appreciate something when people come over. Like, I'm giving a tour this afternoon with some design friends, and when people come over to experience it, like, the word is like magic. Like, it's not magic, like, because we made it and it makes sense, like, literally, like, structurally and physics wise, like, we didn't pull it out of a hat, but I think there is a bit of a wonder when you see like a large building moving on railroad tracks, because it's not normal. And I think for me, it makes perfect sense. For someone else, it may not make sense.
Sure.
Right. For me and the work I want to do, I think the client, it's like the Harry Potter sorting hat goes on and says, hey, like, if I'm the kind of client that wants to make big moves, maybe I should talk to Lou, because he's putting his money where his mouth is when it comes to like this.
Right.
And so anyway.
Yeah. That is, again, very well said. I love it. I think it's, at the very least, I think it's all the stuff you mentioned. It's also really cool and fun, and it works. And I think it's hitting all the right marks. Lou, as we expected, probably the 2 hours went by super quick. We could keep talking, and probably will do. Thank you so much for making the time on a beautiful Friday to sit in the office, your office, and have a chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. And, if I know you'll post the links and stuff, I'm happy to answer questions, about the project. I think one other thing is, creating something that you can share with people. So like I said, even if they're investigating like a small portion of something that we've talked about today, it's really about going from the unknown to the known. And that's a scary thing for a lot of people. But I think people who are out there sharing on Instagram and things about building and making things and working with architects like you guys, and that helps everyone.
Fantastic. So. Yeah, I agree. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail if you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion. Feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.